Uh-oh. Okay, we'll start with this. It would seem that unbeaten up-and-comer in the super bantamweight division, Niagara Falls' Micaiah Kreps, has a fight coming up early next month on the 3rd against an opponent that has yet to be announced, what will be her second fight this year. Her first was back in April. Micaiah actually keeps a good steady schedule of activity for a fighter that is not with a major promotional outfit. She fought 2 times in 2023, 2 times in 2024, and she is set to fight 2 more before this year is out. Currently sporting a professional record of 10 wins with no losses, no draws, and 3 knockouts. A dark horse in the super bantamweight division. Characterizing just how deep this division is, there's the fighters that you know about, and there's a lot of them, but then there are the fighters that you don't. Micaiah Kreps is one among them. How long before young Micaiah fights for an alphabet title? Well, she's a ways out via the WBC. They've got Micaiah ranked all the way down there at 11. Now, she's a bit closer to that brass ring via the WBA. She ranks in at number 3 via the WBA, behind former champion Nazarena Romero and unbeaten up-and-comer Johanna Wanyu of France. Yet another dark horse in this division, and a fighter that you want to keep an eye on. As far as Micaiah ranks in at number 11 via the WBC, number 3 via the WBA, number 2 via the IBF, behind former champion Sky Nicholson. Number 11 WBC, number 3 WBA, number 2 IBF, and number 1 via the WBO. She is closest to mandatory status via the WBO, and because she is set to see action at least one more time before this year is out, you figure that that fight would be the fight that secures it. That in winning her next fight, she will become the mandatory challenger for the winner of Scotney versus Flores. Lest we forget, in my previous video we talked about how Ellie Scotney's got some fight news incoming, and in all likelihood, it's gonna be the fight with Mayeli Flores for Undisputed. Do you think Micaiah gets a chance at the winner of that fight? I'm not sure. I have Ellie Scotney beating Mayeli Flores on points, and I don't see why Ellie would stay in the super bantamweight division thereafter, least of all for a little-known fighter like Micaiah Kreps, that if Ellie's gonna give anybody a shot, I would sooner expect her to give Sky Nicholson a shot, because Sky's got a profile, people know Sky, at least more than they know Micaiah Kreps, and I could maybe see that happening, Scotney versus Nicholson, but Scotney versus Kreps? So let's say that Ellie fights Mayeli and beats Mayeli, leaves the division after that, moves up to featherweight, goes on a campaign up there, the belts get redistributed. That would then mean that Micaiah is closest to becoming the next WBO champion in the absence of Ellie Scotney, if Ellie leaves after the Flores fight. The next wave of champions and what it might look like, Micaiah might get the WBO. Sky Nicholson might get the IBF. Johanna Wanyu might get the WBA, and former champion Yemi Mercado might get the WBC. Currently, she's ranked at number 1 with the green and gold. That's what the next wave of champions might look like if Ellie beats Mayeli and then leaves. That's what the lay of the land might look like. For now, keep your eyes peeled for the ring return of Micaiah Kreps early next month against an opponent that has yet to be announced, and she's on her way. She's knocking on the door of world title honors. It's only a matter of time. Elsewhere in the world of boxing, you may have heard yesterday that Netflix revealed the Canelo Alvarez versus Terence Crawford viewing figures. The old saying goes, if you had something to brag about, you'd be bragging about it. So for the fight, to have happened on Saturday, and the numbers to be released the following Monday, that communicates that Netflix was happy. They were pleased with the end result. Netflix has released its streaming figures for Canelo Alvarez versus Terence Crawford, revealing it as the most viewed men's championship boxing match of this century. The blockbuster event took place at the Allegiant Stadium in Las Vegas last Saturday, setting the stage for Crawford, 42-0 with 31 KOs, to piece together a truly masterful performance. In doing so, the 37-year-old not only dethroned Canelo, 63-3 with 2 draws and 39 knockouts, then 168-pound king, after jumping up 2 weight classes, but also became a 3-weight undisputed champion and a 5-weight champion overall. It's a very short list of fighters who have been champions at 5 weights, and even shorter. Even shorter once you start talking about undisputed. Tuning in for that main event, Netflix estimates was a total of 41.4 million viewers, which also includes those who chose to watch the fight a day later. This figure, however, is based on average minute audience, AMA measurement, estimating the number of people that watched from around the world. The total number of live viewers, meanwhile, is estimated to be in the ballpark of 36.6, with the peak number of concurrent streams, as in the most Netflix accounts that all clicked onto Canelo versus Crawford at one given time, has been reported as 24 million. Indeed, those figures are nothing to be scoffed at, but when considering what was reported for Jake Paul versus Mike Tyson, Canelo versus Crawford rather, unfortunately, pales in comparison. For their Mickey Mouse event last November, Paul and Tyson delivered an estimated AMA of 108 million live viewers, while it is expected that around 125 million people tuned in across the weekend. Peaking at 65 million concurrent streams too, it is fair to say that Paul versus Tyson set an almost impossible target which, quite frankly, may never be trumped. Yet still, Canelo versus Crawford was most certainly a booming success, particularly given that over 70,000 fans in attendance contributed to a gate of 47 million, close to 50, the third highest gate in boxing history, only behind Mayweather versus Pacquiao and Mayweather versus McGregor. I'm not surprised that Canelo and Crawford were not able to reach the Mike Tyson numbers because neither of them are as popular as Mike Tyson. You talk about Mike Tyson versus Jake Paul, and I've said it on more than one occasion that Jake Paul really outdid himself with the Mike Tyson exhibition, and it doesn't really get bigger than that. It doesn't get bigger than that with Canelo or, in this instance, Gervonta Davis, who he's about to fight. I'm pretty sure that he's not going to do with Gervonta what he did with Mike. It doesn't get bigger than Mike Tyson because Mike is easily one of the most recognizable fighters, recognizable sports people of any sport all around the world. So if you do something with him, it's hard to top it. And I directly attribute those viewing figures to Mike Tyson more than anybody, more than Jake Paul. If that many people tuned in, it was for Mike. The way you know is, Jake Paul has fought since then. He fought Julio Cesar Chavez. Did he do with Chavez what he did with Mike? Did he come anywhere near that number? No, they didn't even put a number out. That tells you everything you need to know. You notice how quick Netflix was to put out the numbers for Paul versus Tyson or Canelo versus Crawford? The old saying goes, if you had something to brag about, you'd be bragging about it. Well, nobody was bragging about the viewing figures for the Chavez fight that Jake just had. Not even Jake. So when you think about those Mike Tyson numbers, it becomes very, very obvious. Most of those people were tuning in to see Mike, in the hopes that Mike would knock out Jake, but all the same, the driving force for those numbers was Mike Tyson. Do I think that Jake Paul will now do with Gervonta Davis what he did with Mike Tyson or even come close to it? No, I do not. I question whether or not Jake and Gervonta are going to do the numbers that Canelo and Crawford just did. 41 million. I don't know that they're going to do that because Gervonta doesn't have as many paying customers as Canelo, and Jake doesn't either. So I don't know that putting them together in an inconsequential exhibition match, a circus fight, I don't know that that does 41 million. We'll have to see. There's been an ongoing discussion Which event will draw more eyes to it? Which event will turn out to be bigger? Canelo versus Crawford or Jake versus Gervonta? And now that we have a set of numbers to go off of, for Jake and Gervonta to be bigger, it has to draw more than 41 million viewers to Netflix, generate more than 47 million at the gate, and I don't know that it's going to do that. Canelo and Crawford fought in front of 70,000 people and 41 million at home. And I don't know that Jake and Gervonta are going to do that with an inconsequential circus fight. Canelo is reported to have made $150 million for the Crawford fight, and Crawford is reported to have made $50 million for that fight. I don't know that anybody's giving Jake the kind of money that they gave Canelo. I would guess not. I don't think for a second Jake is getting $150 million for the Gervonta Davis fight, and Gervonta is said to be getting $40 million for Jake Paul, less than Crawford got for Canelo. So if what we're doing is trying to gauge which event is bigger, it would at least seem that the purses for Canelo versus Crawford are bigger than the purses for Jake versus Gervonta. More consequentially, veteran boxing scribe Dan Raphael reacted to the fight over the weekend by saying, "A small group of people sitting near me at the airport gate for our flight. I am overhearing in their lengthy convo about Crawford versus Canelo and how it was on Netflix, and how great it was that such a big fight wasn't on pay-per-view. Turkey's contribution to the sport of boxing, helping to make the American boxing landscape more fertile and more hospitable for someone who may have a casual interest in boxing but doesn't want to pay $80 at a time." How many times have I told you? What caused interest in the sport of boxing to dwindle in the American boxing landscape was oversaturation of the box office market. Too many pay-per-views on too many platforms. You had the PBC doing multiple pay-per-views a year on Fox and on Showtime. At the same time, not enough fights are happening between them and the other promoters, Top Rank, Golden Boy, Matchroom, fights that you could actually bill as pay-per-views, all resulted in dwindling interest in the sport of boxing in America. So when you hear the opposite, that's the proof. That's the confirmation that boxing needs to be given back to the people, and every boxer, every two-bit boxer with two gloves and a gum shield don't belong behind a paywall, don't belong on pay-per-view. Now, Netflix is not exactly a terrestrial network because you have to pay a subscription price just to get it. It doesn't cost that much. So it's not a traditional terrestrial network, but it has the scale, the size audience of a terrestrial network, of an NBC, of a Fox, the kind of audience they used to have. The only way you can get upwards of 41 million people watching a boxing match is on a network as big as a Netflix. So just imagine if Netflix took an even more active interest in showing boxing matches on their platform. Hypothetically, if they picked up a Top Rank, for example, you could get millions and millions of eyes on an ordinary fight, a regular fight, at any given time just because of the size of the platform. No, not 41 million like Canelo and Crawford, but let's say 5 or 6 million for an ordinary fight. We're talking about a Keyshawn Davis fight, an Emiliano Vargas fight, a Xander Zayas fight. You could get those kind of numbers for an ordinary fight if it were Netflix showing it. Now, currently, Netflix only seems interested in hosting the very biggest of the biggest fights. But this interest seems to be growing. They're doing this more and more. At some point, maybe they decide to go into business with a promoter full-time. Fiscally, they could do it. If you're giving Jake, let's say 40 million, and you're giving Gervonta 40 million, that's enough to finance an annual schedule of fights throughout the calendar year. That's what ESPN was giving Top Rank, 80 and 90 million. Netflix has got more than that. To where if they wanted a year-round schedule of fights, regular fights, in between the big ones, they could more than afford it. Pooling from such a large audience over such a large area, because remember, Netflix is a global streaming app. They have a steady stream of cash that's constantly coming in. I remember when Netflix first got started, when they were much smaller, and you used to have to send out for the movies that you wanted to watch. They'd send you those little red envelopes. And a lot of the movies that they had to watch, they were, C-tier and B-tier movies. A lot of those movies, they've grown to obscene amounts. They are much, much bigger now than they were. And I never could have imagined that so long ago, they would get that big. Whereas now, they've got the biggest megaphone of any streaming app, any streaming platform in the industry.
In the world. Them taking a more active role in boxing would be a major game changer.
So you start to wonder if at some point Netflix won't decide to go into business with a promoter or promoters. Over to DAZN, the Joseph Parker versus Fabio Wardley fight that will cost boxing fans, at least here in the United States, approximately $60 to watch. Now that is less than what we normally pay in America, but we shouldn't be paying anything in America for this fight. This is a fight that we should be getting as part of our existing subscription that we're already paying for. I like Joseph Parker. I like Fabio Wardley. I like the fight. I think it's great, but it's not box office worthy. Not in America.
And if they're billing it as a pay-per-view in America, they're billing it as a pay-per-view in the UK. Over there, with that audience, maybe that makes more sense. You would have to read the temperature in the room and ask a Brit if they think this is box office worthy.
If they think this makes sense. But I can tell you now, it makes absolutely no sense to bill this as a pay-per-view in America. This is a Queensberry Promotions show, so often when people think of DAZN or talk about DAZN, Eddie Hearn almost immediately comes to mind, but Eddie doesn't have anything to do with this.
This is George Warren. This is Frank Warren. This is the second time that Queensberry would have put on a pay-per-view in the United States that shouldn't be. Moses Itelma versus Dillian White was billed as a pay-per-view in America. It should not have been. Now this, Joseph Parker versus Fabio Wardley, same deal.
Do they not understand that the more boxing that you put behind a paywall, the less interested the audience is going to be? Have they not seen what's been going on in America? An overabundance of box office fights equaled dwindling viewership. So you start doing that over there in the UK, it's going to be the same thing. It's going to end up the same way. Good number of big fights, big names in the British boxing scene the last 12 months or so have been outsourced to Saudi Arabia. So the boxing fans over there are hungry for boxing locally, but you put this behind a paywall?
Shooting yourself in the foot.
Even worse that you're doing it in foreign markets like the United States. The advantage of DAZN being a global streaming platform is that it caters to a lot of markets. But if you're charging people on top of what you're already charging them to have DAZN, well, that just isn't right. And you have to call it out where you see it. I'm a big fan of DAZN. I've had the platform for years, but they've got to tone down these box office fights. They do. Everybody in combat sports is moving away from the pay-per-view model. So why is Frank and Queensberry billing this as a pay-per-view?
Comes at the expense of the eyes you could be getting on this show.
Many people do you imagine in America are going to pay $60 for Joseph Parker and Fabio Wardley?
Not a good idea.